Welcome to On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsom and I'm here to break down UFC Vegas 61 after the 1 week break. And UFC Vegas 61's headlined by Mackenzie Dern versus Xiaonan. But just before we get into the breakdowns, very quickly, as always, we've got a Base AI recap from our UFC prediction software. Obviously not from last weekend because there was a 1 week break, but from the weekend before, which was UFC Vegas 60. So make sure you check out that Base AI recap. There was a real solid gem in there, and there's another couple of really good predictions as well. So that'll all be on our Base AI playlist on our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/MMA Play 365. And just lastly, before we get into the breakdowns, because we were in a 1 week break, I've started doing special episode podcasts between each break. So the first one that I did was Underdog Hunting, which was a few weeks ago now. Last weekend, I did one on max betting. So make sure you check that out. Educational pieces, dives into a bit of my personal record as a handicapper as well. Talking a little bit about, like I said, max betting, what to be cautious of, where to max bet. So a real good piece in my opinion, and real educational as well. So make sure you check that out if you are interested. However, now we jump into the breakdowns because that's why you're all here, and we go straight into that main event between Mackenzie Dern and Xiaonan. And I think this is a really good fight from a stylistic perspective, because you've got on one side in Xiaonan a real volume heavy striker. She's a dynamic striker. Like I said, she's got a ton of volume. She fires different strikes. She's got punches straight down the middle. She's got good side kicks to the front of the face of her opponents as well. And then on the other side, you've got Mackenzie Dern, who is about as decorated as you get in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, not just from the women's divisions, but the men's as well. I think Mackenzie Dern is one of the best Jiu-Jitsu players in the entire UFC. And this is where you're getting a real good stylistic clash, because you've got an absolute striker versus an absolute grappler. The thing is with Mackenzie Dern, she's working with Jason Perillo, and you can see that within her striking, it's improving fight by fight. I still don't think it's absolutely there. And you look at a fight with Marina Rodriguez, and Marina Rodriguez absolutely schooled Mackenzie Dern when it came to striking. And then you look at Xiaonan fighting Marina Rodriguez, and in my opinion, yes, it was a close fight. Yes, a split decision was probably expected, but I actually thought Xiaonan won that fight. So the fact that Xiaonan is competitive, and maybe even more than competitive, matching and better in Marina Rodriguez on the feet, that tells me here that Xiaonan is going to be the better striker, even though Mackenzie Dern is making those leaps in her striking development. But the one thing that I just can't ignore is the fact that Xiaonan, she's got okay takedown defense. She can get taken down, but it's not easy to get her down unless you're a Carla Esparza with the wrestling, and I'll talk about that in a minute as well. But what I just cannot get out of my head is how easy Carla Esparza had it when she was on top of her. Now, you can make the argument that Esparza's the best wrestler in the division, or at least one of them, and up there with the best wrestlers. And Mackenzie Dern doesn't have that level of wrestling as what Carla Esparza did. But it's when Carla Esparza got Xiaonan down to the mat. Xiaonan was flat on the back. She was stuck. She couldn't really do anything. Esparza was transitioning from position to position, and she ended up stopping her in the second round with ground and pound. Now, you put Mackenzie Dern on top of Xiaonan, and that fight's over. That fight doesn't even get out of that first round. Mackenzie Dern will get Xiaonan out of there either by submission or ground and pound earlier than that, because Mackenzie Dern is legitimately that good in regards to the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Now, this is what makes the fight interesting, because, like I said, Mackenzie Dern doesn't have that level of wrestling that Carla Esparza has. However, does Dern have her own ways to get her fights down to the mat? Absolutely. She'll pull guard if she needs to and pull her opponent on top of her, sweep reverse, or just hit a submission off her back. So this is where Mackenzie Dern is the most dangerous. And for me, man, I want to side with Xiaonan so bad, but I just cannot just forget what Carla Esparza did to Xiaonan, and I just keep on repeating that fight in my head. I put Mackenzie Dern in place of Carla Esparza there, and it's just an absolute whitewash on the mat. So I think Xiaonan is going to have some moments on the feet, but I think Mackenzie Dern is going to throw big punches, big overhands, get herself into that boxing range, close it even further into the clinch, take her down. And I think it's just going to be the end of the fight from there, whether that be ground and pound or whether that be a submission, more likely a submission. But I just, especially for 5 rounds, if this was 3 rounds, I could maybe make an argument, look, Xiaonan stays on her feet for, you know, a couple of rounds and, you know, panic scrambles back up to her feet once she's taken down and maybe steals 2 out of the 3 rounds or makes the fight that close on the scorecards that one judge might see the striking a little more weighted than the grappling. But over 5 rounds, I just think if Mackenzie Dern can take her down in 2 of the... I think she only needs 1 potential takedown to finish the fight with 90 seconds to work, but if she can get a couple of takedowns, if the fight does go a little bit longer, then I just feel that she's going to absolutely roll on Xiaonan to the point where Xiaonan might be a bit hesitant to strike on the feet as well. But whichever way I'm looking at this, I can't unsee what I saw with the Carla Esparza fight. So for that reason, I'm picking Mackenzie Dern to win this fight. And in the next fight, in the co-main event, this is an interesting one. We've got Randy Brown versus Francisco Trinaldo. Randy Brown and Trinaldo have both been in the UFC for years. Obviously, Trinaldo's everybody's favourite MMA grandpa. You know, he's getting up there in age. But to be honest with you, although he's still, you know, losing some fights, he's winning some fights as well, he doesn't look like he's on a massive decline. He's still competitive at this level in the UFC, but he's got Randy Brown ahead of him here, in front of him in this fight. And I do feel that there's a lot of things going against Trinaldo here. So Trinaldo is going to have a 6-inch height disadvantage, with Randy Brown obviously being the taller fighter, the longer fighter. Randy Brown's also going to have an 8-inch reach advantage. Randy Brown's also 12 years younger as well. Now, those 3 statistics are just really important before you even get into a style versus style, because usually the taller fighter will win more often than not, especially the taller fighter with a bigger reach will win more often than not. And then when you add in youth as well, when one fighter's 12 years older and you're at the age of Francisco Trinaldo, and it's not as if Trinaldo's 35 and Randy Brown's 22, you know, or 23, sorry, my maths did me there. But it's not as if you've got that type of age difference. Francisco Trinaldo's in his 40s now. So with a fighter 12 years younger, who's taller, longer, more active as well, I feel that it's a bad matchup. And then when you look at the actual body of work that both fighters do, like I said, Trinaldo's a decent fighter. He's still a good kickboxer. He's still strong. He's still able to secure takedowns. He's still got good jiu-jitsu. But the thing is with Randy Brown, he's just going to be firing constantly. And I think that Randy Brown's going to be good in multiple ranges here. I think he's going to be good from the outside with his kickboxing, kicking in, firing straight punches down the middle as well that are going to be connecting with Trinaldo before Trinaldo's even got himself into a range to strike himself. And I think with the movement that Brown's got, I think he can then come inside. If he does end up tying up with Francisco Trinaldo inside the clinch, I think the big knees, the big elbows, when you're the longer fighter inside the clinch, it can be more awkward for the fighter inside to not strike and have an offensive game, but from a defensive perspective, it can be awkward as well. So this is what I mean with Randy Brown. I think in boxing range is Trinaldo's best range to try and strike in, but to try and constantly keep a fight within that one range for potentially 15 minutes if it goes to a decision is going to be very difficult for Trinaldo, especially when the fight's going to be out of range, coming into range, inside clinch as well, to keep the fight in one specific range. And then even then, Randy Brown's not, you know, completely a fish out of water at all. You know, he's still going to be able to fight inside boxing range himself. I just feel there's a lot of things going against Trinaldo in this fight. I think from a skill versus skill perspective, Trinaldo absolutely matches Randy Brown, maybe even betters him, but all the physical attributes, and then when you calculate that within the ranges as well, I think it's going to be a difficult one for Trinaldo to try and look good in this fight and to ultimately get the win. So for those reasons, I'm picking Randy Brown to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got John Castaneda versus Daniel Willycat Santos. And I think this is going to be a wild fight. I think it's a well-matched fight. I think both fighters are going to come in there. They're going to be going at it. John Castaneda, in his last fight against Miles Johns, you know, a really good victory as an underdog as well. A fight that a lot of people did think Miles Johns was going to win, myself included. So John Castaneda really did prove a lot of people wrong last time out. And John Castaneda is one of these fighters that is quite well-rounded. He's got a good all-round game. He's a decent striker. He can wrestle if he needs to. His grappling is there also. Again, I don't think he's massively prolific in any one specific area of MMA, but I think he's good in all areas. And on the other side, you've got Daniel Santos, who, again, is a well-rounded fighter himself, a very aggressive fighter, forward pressure fighter, will land big, hard shots. We saw in his UFC debut, although he lost that fight, coming in for a UFC debut against Julio Arce and putting on the performance that he did. He stole a round on one of the judges' scorecards also. So I think that Arce made that fight close enough to show that he's ready to come into the UFC. And I think that the fighters he should be fighting right now are the John Castanedas of the world. I think Julio Arce and those types of fighters are just a little bit of a level above right now. So this is what I think is going to make this fight a really good fight, because John Castaneda's quick, Santos is quick. They've both got decent volume. Santos packs, I think, more power, more aggression, more forward pressure, but I think Castaneda's a little bit more calculated in what he does inside the cage as well. But I think where the edge might lie in this fight is within that forward pressure and aggression, because Castaneda also likes to be the forward pressure guy. However, when he's faced with an opponent who is a natural aggressor himself, that's when he can get pushed back. We saw that a little bit in the Eddie Wineland fight. That should have been a fight where John Castaneda was pushing forwards, being that youthful guy with the speed, with the energy. But it was actually John Castaneda fighting on the back foot a lot. And you can see that he's definitely less comfortable fighting on the back foot as he is on the front foot. And with with Daniel Santos has definitely got that aggression and pressure. I'm not sure he's going to get it 100% of the time in this fight. I think he's going to have moments where he's moving backwards, but for the most part, I think Santos is going to have that forward pressure. He's going to have that aggression, and I think we're going to see a real difference in this fight, where Daniel Santos should likely flourish against an opponent that is a step down in competition. And again, that's no disrespect. Arce is a good fighter, but this is a step down in competition for Santos compared to his last fight. And then Castaneda, for me, I don't think he fights as fluently as well on the back foot. So although this fight could be quite close, I think both fighters are definitely going to have the moments. I think Daniel Santos' aggression, pressure, his forward movement, I think he's going to land him some good shots in this fight and make him do a good body of work as well. And whether that be a finish or whether that go to a decision at the end, I do think it's going to be close. If it does go to the scorecards, it could be one of those fights where Castaneda's took a round, definitely. Santos has definitely took a round, and then we're talking about a round that's in question. But I do think that the better body of work is going to be done by Daniel Santos in this fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Daniel Santos to win this fight. And in the next fight, I think this is going to be a fun one of my favourite fights on the entire card. We've got Raoni Barcelos versus Trevin Jones. And it's an interesting one, actually, because both fighters are good fighters, but both fighters are coming off back-to-back losses. You've got Raoni Barcelos losing against Timur Valiev, and then Victor Henry. That Victor Henry one was super surprising. I kind of feel like it might have been a bit of an off night for Barcelos, if I'm being honest. And then on the flip side, you've got Trevin Jones coming off losses to Said Yakub Kakramonov, and then in his last fight, Javid Basharat. And those two fighters that Trevin Jones has lost against, those losses have aged really well, if I'm being honest, because they're solid fighters, and there's no shame to losing to either of those. But in this fight, Barcelos is a real weird one, because everybody was talking about him, coming into potentially the top 15, talking about him as a top 10 fighter, maybe even breaking the top 5 and looking to really surge in the division. And suddenly he loses back-to-back. The Timur Valiev fight was close. I scored it to Valiev personally. And then the Victor Henry fight really wasn't that close. And I think that's the one where it's like, was it a bit of an off night? But in this fight, I think both fighters are going to be in there in front of each other, standing and banging. I think if you look at from a well-rounded perspective, Raoni Barcelos is by far the more well-rounded fighter. Trevin Jones has got decent jiu-jitsu, but his wrestling's not quite there, whereas Barcelos has definitely got the better wrestling in this fight. And because he's got the better wrestling, he's the more likely fighter to end up on top. Now, although Jones has got a decent ground game, decent jiu-jitsu, like I've already mentioned, I just don't think he's going to be able to really threaten much with Barcelos on top of him should the fight end up on the mat. And if the fight does end up on the mat, like I said, because Barcelos has got the better wrestling, it's more likely he's on top of Jones. When you're looking at the striking, Jones has got freakish power, but so's Barcelos. And I think from a power perspective, both fighters have got decent chins, but again, I expect Barcelos to be the slightly sharper striker, the slightly better striker, the slightly more powerful striker, the striker with more volume as well. I think he's the fighter with the better wrestling, the better topside jiu-jitsu. I think his topside jiu-jitsu is going to be better than the defensive bottom side jiu-jitsu of Trevin Jones as well. So I'm having a real hard time seeing Trevin Jones win this fight. At least with Victor Henry, he was on the feet, moving around, popping volume, and that's just not Trevin Jones's game. So I think Barcelos has got a good fight ahead of him. One of these fighters is about to go on a 3-fight losing streak, which is a real shame, but I think that fighter is going to be Trevin Jones. So I'm picking Raoni Barcelos to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Sodiq Yusuff versus Don Shainis. And I was actually wrong about this because on the last event, Sodiq Yusuff's supposed to have fought Giga Chikadze, and I said I think the UFC are going to have a hard time rebooking Sodiq Yusuff because you can't really rebook Sodiq Yusuff against a fighter that's a newcomer to the UFC. You know, you don't really go from a Giga Chikadze to a newcomer, but that's exactly what's happened. It appears that the UFC really couldn't have got anything for Sodiq Yusuff, and he didn't want to waste a fight camp. So in comes Don Shainis. And listen, Sodiq Yusuff's last time I looked, I think he was a minus 1100 favourite in this fight, and I completely get it. You look at Don Shainis. Don Shainis is a striker in fact, he's got a decent all-round game, but he's a striker, and then he's got some decent wrestling with some ground and pound as well. But the thing is, when I've watched Don Shainis fight, he tends to brawl a lot. The quality of striking seems to be a little bit subpar from a UFC standards perspective, winging shots, and it looks... From some of the shots and the brawls that I've seen, it looks quite amateurish, and I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. Maybe he's just got into a 100-mile-an-hour brawl, and that's just what it looks like. But I feel like Sodiq Yusuff's going to have his way with him in this fight. I think that Shainis isn't going to be able to take Yusuff down, at least not easily. If he does take him down, he's not just going to be able to sit on top of him and ground and pound him like he's done his previous opponents. You know, Yusuff will be back up to his feet. And I think Yusuff is, you know, if Don Shainis enters a brawl with Yusuff, I think Sodiq Yusuff's got power, combinations, speed. I think he's got his movement there as well. His defensive works there. I think Sodiq Yusuff is really a terrible matchup for Don Shainis. I think Don Shainis has took this fight to get into the UFC, to get himself a contract, and I completely get that, but I think he's going to be taking that L to get into the UFC here. I don't see Sodiq Yusuff losing this fight unless, you know, like I always say, you know, we're in mixed martial arts, they're wearing 4-ounce gloves, they are in the UFC, which is the brightest lights in the sport, so maybe that one punch does catch Yusuff and knock him out, but outside of that, I just really don't see it at all. So I'm picking Sodiq Yusuff to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is a good one as well. We've got Mike Davis versus Viacheslav Borshchev. And like I said, it's a good fight. We've got two absolute bangers here, but I feel like Mike Davis is the more well-rounded fighter. I think that Davis can match Viacheslav Borshchev on the feet. Listen, Borshchev's an absolute elite striker, and there's a reason why, you know, he's scored big knockouts. There's a reason why fighters generally don't stand with him too long, because there's a path to victory elsewhere, which I'll also talk about very shortly. But Borshchev's a really legit striker. He's a good kickboxer. He's got a lot of kickboxing experience. So coming in against Mike Davis, I think if you're looking at a technical striking perspective and who is the better striker, I would say Borshchev's the better natural striker. But the thing is, Mike Davis is a good striker himself. He keeps things really simple. His fundamentals are good. And more importantly, his volume's there as well from a striking perspective, and he'll be in your face. Now, that could potentially be an issue for Mike Davis, because pumping a load of volume out there at Borshchev and getting in his face is a recipe for Borshchev landing something and knocking him out. But Mike Davis is tough as well, and I feel that even if Borshchev does connect with him and hurt him, I think Mike Davis is going to be doing the better work on the feet from a volume perspective and just a greater output and a greater body of work. But then this is where it gets really interesting, because there's a path to victory which Mark Diakiese found the blueprint for against Borshchev, and that's to wrestle him and to take him down. Now, it's not easy to take Borshchev down. I know Mark did it numerous times, but Mark's a really good wrestler, and his jiu-jitsu is absolutely solid as well. So Mike Davis has got to be on his game in regards to that. But I think Mike Davis has got the skills to be able to shoot those takedowns, get the takedowns, and potentially control Borshchev on the mat as well. We've seen Mike Davis work with Gilbert Burns, defend himself against Gilbert Burns on the mat. So he's definitely got skills there. And I think when you're looking at this fight from an overall perspective, yes, Borshchev's got every chance of, hurting Mike Davis, potentially knocking him out as well if the fight does stay on the feet for long periods of time. But I also think Mike Davis isn't just going to get completely run over on the feet striking. I think his wrestling's going to be there as well. I think his topside grappling could potentially be a factor in this fight as well. I feel like Mike Davis is just better in more areas in this fight, and for that reason, I'm picking Mike Davis to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Randy Costa versus Guido Cannetti. And this is a real interesting fight for how it could potentially play out, because it wouldn't shock me if it was one of those types of fights where Randy Costa went balls to the wall early on, tries to knock Guido Cannetti out, can't knock him out, then tires out himself, and then Guido Cannetti, being the little energy bunny that he is, just takes this fight late and takes over the fight, into rounds 2 and into round 3. But then on the flip side, Randy Costa could go balls to the wall and knock Guido Cannetti out early in this fight, and ultimately I think that is what happens. I kind of think that Randy Costa's going to be improving. Not only, I don't think he's got a cardio issue. I said this about Johan Leoness a couple of weeks ago. I don't think it's a cardio issue. I think it's just a pacing issue. He throws a lot into every strike and goes absolutely crazy early into every fight as well. And I think it's only natural for a human just to get tired. So I think if Randy Costa really gets his pace and timing down and really manages that well, I think he can be a more dangerous fighter. He can go late into fights and find knockouts as well. But I think whichever way you look at it, Randy Costa's going to find that knockout. I just don't think that Guido Cannetti takes that barrage of strikes from Randy Costa like some other fighters have been able to do, and then push through that barrage and then take over the fight if Randy Costa tires. I do think that's a path to victory for Guido Cannetti, just weather the storm and take over late. But I just think early in this fight, Randy Costa, even though he does have those crazy first rounds, he does tend to land 3 or 4 really hard and clean punches on his opponents. And I'm just not sure Guido Cannetti's chin can take that sort of power. So I do think that Randy Costa should make improvements to the pace in here. But I think even if he makes improvements to the pace, and he's still got a legitimately hard punch. So I think even if he paces himself, he could potentially land that hard punch in a rounds 2 or 3. If he doesn't pace himself and goes balls to the wall in round 1, then I think he's going to land 3 or 4 hard punches there anyway. So whichever way I'm looking at it, I think he's going to connect with some hard punches on Guido Cannetti, punches that I don't think Guido Cannetti will be able to withstand. So for those reasons, I'm picking Randy Costa to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Brendan Allen versus Krzysztof Jotko. And I think this is another really well-matched fight. I think that Brendan Allen is going to bring a good style into this fight. I think that because he's an erratic fighter, he's a decent mover, he's got good grappling as well, I think he's going to be able to put something on Jotko to make this fight really interesting. But the thing is, from the other side with Jotko's got this real ability to just take the sting out of fights, really slow fights down. And that enables him to fight at his own pace, to dictate the pace of the fight, the range of the fight. I think Jotko's a veteran as well, obviously training at American Top Team for all those years. You go in to be a well-rounded fighter. His striking's good, his wrestling's good, his grappling's good. And I think that Jotko's ultimately, because of that and because of the way he takes the sting out of fights and slows it down, like I've already said, I think he's going to be able to neutralise some of Allen's best attributes and threats in this fight from an offensive perspective, and that's with the grappling now. Allen's striking is improving, granted under Henry Hoof and the Killcliff FC group, but I still think Jotko is the more technical striker, the sounder striker, the striker with more fight IQ. And I think Brendan Allen, although he's got some decent striking himself, if this was a 15-minute kickboxing fight, I think Jotko would win. But then Allen's going to have to try and get this fight to the mat. And this is where I think it's going to be interesting, because I think that Jotko's defensive wrestling is better than the offensive wrestling of Allen. And then when you flip it, I kind of think Jotko's offensive wrestling might be enough to take Brendan Allen down as well, better than Allen's defensive wrestling. So when you're looking at a fighter who's more likely to have that top control time, I think that's more likely to be Jotko. The only problem is if Jotko does go to the mat willingly with Brendan Allen, he's just got to mind his P's and Q's and be careful, because Allen's a dangerous grappler. But then you look at Jotko's last fight against Meerschaert, he went to the mat with Meerschaert and was fine, and Meerschaert's a decent grappler as well. So I kind of think that Brendan Allen, I think as a fighter, overall, his ceiling's probably a little bit better right now. I think he's a good fighter. I just think stylistically, the way Jotko really slows down fights and fights methodically, and again, no disrespect to Jotko, but the fights are relatively not that entertaining, but it works for Jotko and gets him wins, and I suppose that's all that matters for Jotko here. So for those reasons, I'm picking Krzysztof Jotko to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Julija Stoliarenko versus the newcomer Chelsea Chandler. Now, I actually really like this fight because I think Chelsea Chandler is going to be a fighter to watch in the UFC. I think she's definitely a fighter that's going to be growing. She's young as well, so she's going to be developing, she's going to be improving. And if you watch her fights in chronological order, you can actually see those developments and improvements. But she's a fighter that doesn't mind standing and banging. She'll wing big, hard shots. You know, in a brawl, she's got no problem taking a punch to deliver 2 or 3 herself. But where she really thrives is within the clinch. She's strong, she's physical, she can hold her opponents against the cage, and she's got a good grappling game as well. So she loves the trip takedowns from the clinch, getting fighters down to the mat, rolling on her opponents, landing ground and pound, looking for submission opportunities. But this is where I really love this fight, because by taking Stoliarenko down, she's going to be jumping into a shark tank, because Julija Stoliarenko is a type of fighter that has got so many round 1 armbar finishers. And you can see even when she doesn't get the first round armbar, if she's taken down consistently, the armbar's always a threat. She's always looking for it. She can hit it from different angles. She traps both arms in different ways, and she throws the legs up really quick. So Chelsea Chandler, the way she fights is going to make this fight really interesting, because I think that she is going to take the fight down to the mat. I think we are going to see Stoliarenko fire up armbar attempts, and one of those armbar attempts legitimately could land. I know people joke about how, armbar off your back in the UFC and all that sort of stuff, but like Julija Stoliarenko really is a specialist there. But I think Chelsea Chandler's the better overall fighter. I think on the feet, from a technical perspective, there's not much between each fighter, but I think Chandler's more aggressive, firing harder punches. And then I think inside the clinch, she's stronger, so she's going to be able to run some of the clock down there, winning rounds there. And I think if she gets her down on top, as long as she just passes out of guard, and even if Julija Stoliarenko recovers guard, just keep passing outside of it, I think Chandler will be okay. It's going to be a really interesting fight, because it could be one of those fights Chelsea Chandler's absolutely dominating until she gets caught in the armbar, or she just dominates in general. But I am going to side with the latter and dominates in general, so I'm picking Chelsea Chandler to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Joaquim Silva versus Jesse Ronson. And I think Joaquim Silva here, in my opinion, is the better fighter. I think he's the better all-round fighter, but the one aspect of his game that I'm just really unsure of right now, the big red flag, is the durability and the chin, because he's been knocked out badly in his last 2 fights. Obviously got knocked out badly against Nasrat Haqparast, and then against Ricky Glenn as well in about 40 seconds. And the thing is with Jesse Ronson, I don't think he's that much of a lesser technical striker or a lesser all-round fighter, but I do think he's got a ton of aggression and a ton of power, and I think that could be the difference maker in this fight. I think that Joaquim Silva, if he's to win this fight, he's probably going to have to get through all 3 rounds. And does he get through all 3 rounds without taking a couple of hard shots? I don't think so. Does he have legitimate durability issues right now? He might do. I'm not 100% convinced he has, but it's definitely a question mark. It's definitely a red flag for me. I think Jesse Ronson's a decent all-round fighter, enough to be able to deal with Joaquim Silva from a technical perspective. And then when you add in the power as well, I do think that Ronson just has more chance of winning this fight, because he's got that edge in the power and a decent all-round game himself. So for those reasons, I'm picking Jesse Ronson to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Maxim Grishin versus Philipe Lins. Now, Philipe Lins looked like a totally different fighter last time out, moving back down to light heavyweight, grew his hair out, grew his beard out, and just looked completely different. But I wasn't completely sold on the performance, and he started off a little bit slow. He dropped that round 1 to Marcin Prachniow, and after he dropped that round 1, he did come back in the fight, but he didn't come back in a way that he just completely lit the cage up. He came back in a way where he slowly grinded his way back into the fight. And actually, towards the end of the fight, he was looking a little bit tired as well. And this is where I think Grishin's got a good fight ahead of him here, because Grishin doesn't really tire that much. He's got a massive frame for the light heavyweight division. Used to be a heavyweight, fought plenty of times at heavyweight as well. He's got power in his hands. He's got a calm striking game. but he'll also fire plenty of kicks to the legs as well of his opponent. And like, you look at him against Dustin Jacoby, for example. Dustin Jacoby, in my opinion, is one of the best strikers in the division from a technical standpoint. His kickboxing solid. And Maxim Grishin, a lot of people thought that Grishin won that fight. It was a bit controversial in some people's eyes, but ultimately it was a very close fight. So that tells you what you need to know about the technical striking of Grishin. But then he also dropped Jacoby twice as well. And again, that was a bit of a shock. Grishin also hurt William Knight a couple of times as well, including right at the end of the fight. So I think that Grishin's got a good technical striking game. I think he's got power. I think he's going to be able to match the physical stature of Philipe Lins as well. And then when it comes to a gas tank and the fight, grinding and getting close, because I do think it's going to be one of those types of fights where there's going to be quite a bit of clinching as well. Both fighters are going to be tired. Both fighters are going to be really trying to outwork their opponent. But again, I feel like with Philipe Lins timing last time against Pratniau, I think if you put Grishin in there instead of Pratniau in that fight, I think Philipe Lins will have lost the fight. So I do think it's a difficult fight for Philipe Lins. I'm not sure really how he pushes Maxim Grishin to the limits to really start trying to take over this fight. I think Lins is going to do good work. I think some of the rounds, a couple of the rounds might be quite close, but ultimately I think Grishin does have the edge over Philipe Lins in this fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Maxim Grishin to win this fight. And in the next fight, I'm not sure if this bout order is going to change, but I've got no idea why this fight's this low down. We've got Aleksei Oleinik versus Ilir Latifi. This fight should have happened a couple of months ago, but it's happening right now. And I think Ilir Latifi, the one aspect that you've really got to look into this fight from a numbers perspective is Ilir Latifi's never ever been taken down. And that's going to be an issue for Oleinik, because Oleinik is definitely going to need to take Ilir Latifi down. Now, Oleinik's got different ways of getting fights to the mat, though. He could, like I said with Mackenzie Dern earlier on, listen, Aleksei Oleinik's an absolute wizard on the mat in the world of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So even pulling guard or just diving for a leg and causing like a slip or a panic from Ilir Latifi might be enough for Oleinik. And if Oleinik can take him down, I think it's going to be fight over. Like, Oleinik seriously has that legit BJJ game, and even though Latifi doesn't have much of a neck, I think Oleinik could potentially even find a submission on the neck. We saw that with Mark Hunt. Mark Hunt's not really got that much of a neck, but Oleinik managed to choke him. So I feel that Ilir Latifi, as long as he keeps the fight standing, that he's going to be fine in this fight. He's going to land bombs. I think one of those bombs could potentially knock Oleinik out as well. And I do feel that when Oleinik comes into range, even if he's coming into range to pull guard or to, like I said, to dive at a leg or something, I feel like Ilir Latifi's power is such an equalizer in this fight that really will cause problems on a chin that is a little bit diminished. You know, you've got to say that with Oleinik, his durability isn't quite there. So I feel that Ilir Latifi is just going to be able to stand and bang as Oleinik's coming into range. I think Ilir Latifi's wrestling background, the fact that no fighter's ever taken him down in the UFC, is going to play a big factor in this fight as well, because it ultimately is just going to make this fight stay standing for long periods of time. And I think that does Ilir Latifi crack Oleinik before Oleinik finds a takedown? Unfortunately, I love Oleinik, but I feel like that's the way it's going to go. So for those reasons, I'm picking Ilir Latifi to win this fight. And we're into the final fight of this breakdown of this episode of the podcast. We've got Jessica Penne versus Tabitha Ricci. And I think that Penne is going to have some moments in this fight for sure, but I kind of feel like Ricci's style, with her relentless wrestling, her topside grappling, I think Ricci is going to have to be careful, because Penne is a very savvy grappler, and if you make one mistake, you know, that takedown might turn into a scramble, into a back take for Penne, and then suddenly Ricci's giving up her back and getting choked out. But as long as Ricci minds her P's and Q's within the grappling after the wrestling, I think she's going to be fine in this fight. I think striking, Penne is going to try and stand tall, strike long, strike from the outside, whereas Ricci, she's like a pit bull in there. She'll be trying to close the distance, get inside of range, inside of that boxing range, land big hard strikes so she can get in to those entries into the takedowns against the cage, take Penne down and do some good work on top. I think as long as, like I've already said, Ricci minds her P's and Q's after she takes Penne down, gets Penne settled first, I think that's when she'll probably be fine on top. That may make Penne a little bit hesitant, a little bit jumpy when Ricci's coming into range later in the fight. Also, I don't think it's going to be a complete whitewash from Ricci. I do think there's going to be elements of this fight that are going to be dangerous for Ricci, that she does have to be very cautious of. But when you're looking at a fighter fighter getting a hand raised at the end of the fight. I am picking Tabitha Ricci to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. As always, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. I'm getting some really good feedback, good reviews as well. So thank you for that as well. If you are watching this and you're not subscribed, please hit that subscribe button. It really does help us help the channel grow. We're trying to get to 1,000 subscribers. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. I really do appreciate it. If you want to leave a comment, tell me your picks, your bets in the comments. I will always try and get back to the comments on these YouTube videos. But for now, I'm Newsom. Thanks for listening. We'll see you again next week.